How you doing today?
Good, Billy. I'm doing good, old friend.
I know it's always, we're for those watching and listening, we're good friends. We've been friends for years. I feel like we've known
We've
each
been
other
friends
since
since 2002.
it's crazy. It's crazy. And so when we get a chance to sit down and talk, we have this friendship. We usually talk for 20 minutes before our interviews and we love to catch up. And, I want to get into so many different things about your story. But for those who don't know, I want to kind of go back, okay, to April 20th, 1999. I want to go back to the beginnings of your story, and then I want to move into what you're doing now. Obviously, you've been very vocal, surviving Columbine, telling your story, sharing it. But let's go back to that day, which I know you've spoken about so much in your experience. How did that morning start out for you? Take us through those events.
Yeah, the day the Columbine shooting happened that morning, I was with my sister. She was waiting for me in the car, and I was in the bathroom perfecting my perfect hair. And she was waiting for me. And I got into the car, and we started getting into a little argument and a little fight, and started to call names. And got to the school, and I got out of the car, and I slammed the car door shut on her. I went into my classes, and then I went to the library to study for a test. And it was April, so it was near the end of the school year, and I started hearing these popping noises coming from outside the school. And at first I thought it was a senior prank, that some seniors had brought some firecrackers to school and were setting them off. And so everyone in the library was kind of looking around as we were hearing these popping noises, just thinking, we all kind of thought, I think a lot of us, that they were firecrackers. And so some time went by, a few minutes went by, and this teacher ran into the room. She was very frantic, and she was yelling at all of us that there were two students outside the school with guns shooting other students. And so she went over to the phone to call the police, and while she was on the phone, she was yelling at all of us to hide and get underneath.
Can I ask you a question? Can I stop you there for a minute? And
yeah,
in that moment, when she came in and said that, because obviously you assume it's senior pranks, it's something else going on. What was going through your mind in those initial moments following her coming in and saying that to you?
honestly, initially I thought maybe she was in on this prank. It seemed like whatever was happening wasn't quite real. It just didn't feel real. It felt surreal. And so when she came in, I had this weird thought that, is she in on this prank? And because she's in a very distraught, serious screaming, and we're all thinking there's some kind of prank going on. So
Yeah.
so she starts yelling at all of us. So it didn't start to get serious for me until the shooters came into the school and were throwing pipe bombs, and it was causing the school floor to shake, or the floor that I was on to shake. And when I started hearing the gunshots getting louder, I still didn't quite register to me what was going on, but it started to feel scary. I started to feel afraid, started to feel fear. And then when the shooters came into the room, which the library where I was the first room they came into, that's when I knew that this was not a game, that this was real. And that's when I was completely terrified. And at one point, right before they came in, my two friends, who were just very scared, were kind of freaking out next to me. And I felt like I heard that still small voice speak to me, and it said to be still. And so I became very quiet and very still, and I remained that way the whole time I was in the library. I didn't realize it then, but I really think that saved my life, was remaining still and not drawing any attention to myself. So when the shooters came into the room, they began to taunt and make fun of students as they went around the room. They would peek underneath the table and say boo and shoot a girl. At one point they said, let's get anyone with a white hat on. And it was almost as if they were acting out some role, acting out like some movie. It's like they were having fun doing it, like hooping and hollering, getting everybody's like yelling to the room different things. And they came over to where I was, and they saw my friend Isaiah. Isaiah was one of the very few black students at my school. and they had Hitler was a role model of theirs. And so when one of them saw Isaiah, he called the other one over, and then they started to call Isaiah racial slurs, and then drug him out from underneath the table. And he tried to back up, and the last thing that he said was, "I want to see my mom." And so they shot and killed Isaiah, and then they shot and killed my friend Matt. And the whole time I was just lying down underneath this table, and I started, at that point their blood was getting on me, and I thought I was going to die. And so yeah, that was being in that moment. I thought my life was over. And then the two shooters, shortly after they came over to where I was, they left the library. They had killed 10 students. They wounded over a dozen. And my ears are ringing very loud from the shotgun blast that I thought my ears were bleeding. And that's when I felt like I heard God speak to me. In a moment in my life, I'm careful with the phrase God told me, but I felt that God spoke to me very strongly, and almost as if I could hear it audibly. And it was a all-knowing, powerful, calming voice that just said, "Get out of there." And without knowing if the two shooters are still in the room or not, I listened to that voice, and I'm sorry, I have to back up. Right before I heard that voice, I was feeling all this fear, and I was just paralyzed. I couldn't move, and I literally felt like my heart was going to stop beating. And so I asked God to take away my fear. And right after I asked that, I felt like he did. And I felt like I could move and think, and I opened my eyes and moved around. And that's when I heard him speak to me and tell me, "Get out of there." And so I was the first student in the room to stand up, and I yelled at everyone, "Let's get out of here." And nobody at first moved because everyone was too scared to move. And so again, I kind of rallied, "Let's get out of here. I think they're gone. Everyone, let's get out of here." And I heard someone asking for help, and I turned around to see a girl, and has her shoulder missing from a shotgun blast, and she's rocking back and forth under this table asking for help. And I helped pick her up, and a group of us ran out of an emergency exit. And as soon as we got outside, there was a police car outside, and we ran and got behind that car. And I can't tell you, I mean, we were literally felt like I was running for my life. And when I got behind that car, I can't really describe the amount of relief and just the pure happiness of just being alive. I mean, it was such a mixed emotion, because I had this pure happiness and joy of being alive. And at the same time, I felt even then really bad about leaving my friends underneath that table.
As you are describing this, and I've heard you tell this story many times over the years on projects we've worked on and interviews we've done, and I still get chills every time. And you're sitting there, you're describing events that no person should ever have to see. You're describing things that you saw that are very difficult to hear, let alone to see. And I want to talk about your sister Rachel in a moment, but moving past that event, right? How have you been able to grapple with those images? You've described them, and you've done this many times. I mean, a lot of people make a decision that they're going to be silent about what they've seen, or they're going to speak about it. And you've helped so many people by speaking about it. But how have you processed through those images over these years?
Well, I've had a couple of really big keys to my healing, and I just gave a presentation to the Kansas State Governor's Mental Health Conference, and I really did some thinking about what were the real things that helped me. And so I listed out, I think, 6 things, and I'll just share with them the things that I had. Were the first thing was, when I think about it, I call it stillness. Time of being still and quiet and prayer and meditation. And from that place, I feel like God really spoke to me that there was a purpose in all of this for me, that he was going to carry me through this, that this wasn't in vain. There was in my quiet times, I really found a lot of strength. So that was a big piece for me, was just stillness, practicing stillness. And the second thing was, and that ties along obviously with my faith. I mean, so if I were to say the biggest thing that helped me was faith, but but in addition to that, one of the things I've been taught in my faith is that my father taught me when I was young to be a see-througher. And there's a verse in scripture that says, if your eye is single, it is full of light. But if it is, but if not, it is full of darkness. And so it's, I was kind of taught to see through both the good and the bad that happens in my life, that God had a plan for with both the things, and not to try to escape all the pain and problems, but actually it's through pain and problems that I get to know him on a deeper level. And there's even a scripture in Romans that says that for creation is not subjected to futility and frustration of its own will, but by him who subjects it in hope, in essence, that we basically come to know him better. So I had this belief of seeing through the tragedy, and to an invisible hand behind it that was going to do some good out of it, work some good, and in my life as well. The second thing was, well, I have a whole list I could go through, but
I want to hear. I want to hear at least one or two more of these, because I would imagine there are people who have gone through, who are watching or listening, who have gone through different kinds of traumas, right? Different things in their life that are obviously not the same, maybe, as what you faced here, but that this kind of journey of healing after experiencing and seeing something so unimaginable, that's helpful to people, I think. So yeah, go and give us a couple
well, I'll
more
just
of these.
list them off, and I'll send you the list of them. But it was stillness, it was time with family and friends, it was communication, but communication with a purpose. I did start talking about my experiences, but I also had a kind of a reason for it behind it, and that was to help be a change maker, to help change things for the good. I learned forgiveness was one of the biggest healing pieces, because for a couple of years and I could share about this more later, but for a couple of years I just was so full of anger, hating the shooters. And I met someone who lost a lot more, lost his entire family, who had an impact on me and talked to me about forgiveness and letting go. To me, forgiveness was really letting go. And what I would do in my prayer and my stillness is I remember, and the shooters were always on the news, and so it was just a constant reminder. And even the news was kind of making me angry, because they were telling this not true story that the two shooters were pushed to the edge with bullying, and that's why Columbine happened. And I knew that wasn't really the real story. Even the psychologists now, years later, that have looked at everything, that said that's only part of their why, but it was really a shallow way to tell why. And there were deeper things. And the biggest reason to me was that the shooters focused on everything negative in this world. But letting go of that anger, and I would actually just, in my prayer, I just let go of my right to be angry. See, that's what forgiveness was. I had a right. I was justified to be angry. I had a right to be angry. And for me, forgiveness was letting go of that right. But what it did for me personally was it changed me. And actually, it was only until I really forgave that I gave my first presentation, in a full presentation in a school. And that's what I do now, speak in schools. And so that was part of my healing process. And I probably wouldn't be, really living out my purpose, or what I feel like I'm called to do, if I didn't eventually let go of all that. And it wasn't a one-time thing. It was a process. And then
forgiveness works that way, though, right? I mean, it's something I would imagine you have times where anger can creep back in, or where frustration can come back in at moments. I don't know, but that it's a continuous journey. I feel like forgiving, you have a moment where you might start that journey, but you got to keep at that.
Yeah,
Is that
forgiveness
accurate?
is usually not an event. It's like you said, it's really just a part of your attitude. It's really becomes a part of your makeup. You're part of your character. You're just a forgiving person. And whether it's something slight that somebody offends you, or somebody that you're in regular relationship with. And what I've learned about forgiveness is, just because you forgive somebody doesn't mean you excuse what they did. Or it doesn't mean, and sometimes we do, sometimes we say, hey, it's okay, we all make mistakes. But there's some offenses that, no, you don't have to be connected with that person after after something. You can even take somebody to court and still practice forgiveness. It's forgiveness is an issue of the heart, and it's a letting. For me, it was a letting go. And the last thing I have a few more things, but choosing positive influences was big for me. I just found out the shooters at Columbine, they wanted to, in a video that's never been seen by the public, that families got to see. They made this video in their parents' basement. They're referred to as the basement tapes. And in it, they talked about wanting to start a chain reaction of school shootings. In fact, at the very end of the video, one of them picked up a sawed-off shotgun and pointed it at the camera, the same shotgun he used to kill my friend Isaiah, and said, "We need to kickstart a revolution. We need to start an effing chain reaction here." And so they wanted to start a chain reaction of school shootings. And so they wanted to cause as much negative impact on this world. So after I became determined, you can actually take anger and turn it into determination and make it work for you. You can neurologically, and there's certain negative emotions you can neurologically translate into positive ones. Like you can take sadness and turn it into appreciation for life, anxiety or nervousness into excitement, and fear into courage. And there's psychological stuff you can find out about all of those, but there's 4 negative emotions you can translate. So I became determined. I wanted to make a positive difference. So how was I going to do this? How was I going to make a positive impact in this world and on other people? Well, I started choosing positive influences in my life. Mentors, books, the shows I watch, the videos I watch. And I don't watch like all perfectly squeaky clean stuff, but a lot of what I dwell on, I don't ignore the negative in this world, but I have a big belief, and I learned this a lot from the shooters, of focusing on the positive. Obviously, it's scriptural. Philippians tells us, think on things that are good, lovely, of good report, excellent things. But I learned it from the shooters because I realized, looking through their journals, the real reason Columbine happened was that they just saw the negative in themselves all the time and in other people and in this world. They could be in the Sistine Chapel in Rome and see Michelangelo's beautiful painting and find dirt in the corner and just focus on that. That's how they were. And so I decided that, I wanted to make a positive impact, so I needed positive influences in my life.
And you've made a huge impact in speaking about this. And, you immediately were speaking about it, in the wake of it and inspiring people in that process. And you've continued to do that. And you mentioned speaking in schools. And all the things you've done have been really incredible. Going back to the beginning of this conversation, you said goodbye to your sister that day. And then you were in the library. At what point did you realize, and by the way, for those who want to know more, your parents did an incredible book, Rachel's Tears. I know there are other books as well. I'm Not Ashamed is a film on Pure Flix that your mom worked on with Pure Flix that tells your sister's story. But at what point were you made aware that something was wrong and that Rachel was hurt? And how did you journey through that part of the story?
Yeah. So when I was behind that police car after I escaped the library, I was actually holding a girl. Her name is Val Schnur, and she had been shot in the library, but she escaped and she was alive. And she had been questioned about her faith while she was in the library. And I was helping her not to go to sleep. She was losing a lot of blood. And then other police cars came by and began to pick up students and take them to a nearby street. And right before I left, someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "I think there's a girl that's been shot over there." And I looked out from behind the police car and I could see a body, but I didn't recognize who it was, but I was looking at my sister. And then I got picked up and went to a nearby street, and I got on a phone, and the first thing I said to my mom was, "Mom, I'm okay, but I think there's something wrong with Rachel." I just had this feeling that something wasn't right. And went home. My family was shocked to see me because I had blood all over my clothes, and we just waited all night for Rachel to call. Kept trying to keep the lines open, and we waited all night into the next day. And the next morning, the police department called and said she was the first one that was killed. And when my mom came down to tell me the news, I remember she came downstairs, and she's real short, and came to me, and I knew what she was about to tell me. And before she even got it out, I just felt to put my hands on her shoulders, because here was a mom who lost her daughter and now has a son who's come home with blood all over him. God knows been through what. She didn't know at that point what I had been through. But I just wanted to alleviate her pain. So I put my hands on her shoulders and said, Mom, I'm okay. God's going to take care of me. And honestly, so many people began praying for Columbine in our community, and even me and my family. And I actually, Billy, felt prayers help me. I literally felt, I even remember telling people a few times, I think I told my cousin once, I was like, I feel like people are praying for me. And I never said that before. I never had that kind of feeling, but there was a grace that really came in and really helped carry me through. And then I also feel like there was an anointing on my sister's story, and she had this feeling about her life, this intuitive feeling, this prophetic feeling that she wasn't going to live to be very old. And at the same time, she had this prayer to God, God, use me to reach the unreached. And now her story and the things that she did for other people and the chain reaction of kindness that she showed to other people has inspired millions of teenagers. And you can go into hundreds, maybe 1,000 schools across the country, probably 1,000 or more. And there's quotes of her straight from her journals on walls. And I have a book of emails from kids over the years that had contemplated suicide, that heard her story and chose to hold on. Just over 1,000 emails just from students like that. So God really has used her to impact a lot of people. And there's some
millions of people, I would argue, she's impacted. And when you look at, you mentioned earlier that chain reaction that the shooters wanted to spark, right? That chain reaction of hate and evil. And you look at the chain reaction that your sister wanted to inspire people with. And it's fascinating to me, even before I knew you and before I interacted with your family, the journals and the details as those came out, even over the years after knowing you. What was it like for you? Obviously, this is your sister, and you're seeing these journal entries that are saying things about what you mentioned, that she didn't think she was going to live a long life. She had this feeling. You know, you have the drawings that she did, the one in particular with the tears falling down on the flower, and those sort of corresponding with the number of people who were killed. And there are all these elements of her story that are very, I'm going to use the word supernatural, but you can see this hand of God over her life and how she's impacted so many people. What has that been like for you outside of your own story, to watch that journey and then to discover those things in the journals?
Well, yeah, just to give reference of some of these things that she said and did, about a half hour before she was killed, she was seen in her class drawing a picture. At the end of class, she took the picture up to her, and her friend said that when she was drawing this picture, they were supposed to be doing some project. And she said, Rachel, come on, let's get to work. And she said Rachel wouldn't even look up. She was so focused on writing in her journal. She then takes this journal up to her teacher right before class ends and shows it to her. And Mrs. Carruthers was her teacher and was my teacher as well later on. Said, wow, Rachel, what is it? And she said that Rachel looked at her and said, it's my tears. I'm crying. And then she said, Mrs. Carruthers, I'm going to have an impact on the world. And Mrs. Carruthers said, Rachel, I have no doubt of that. And then not 30 minutes later, she was killed. And the thing that she put in her journal was a picture of her eyes crying 13 tears. Well, there were 13 victims that were killed that day. It's watering a rose with drops of blood coming off from it. She told her teacher also that her drawing wasn't finished. And she drew the same rose 4 other times in her journals, growing out of a Columbine flower. Columbine is not just the name of our school, it's a flower, in the Colorado state flower. And the rose is the U.S. national flower. It's America's flower, is the rose. And so my dad, there's another piece, my dad got a call from a guy that he didn't know. We didn't see this drawing until 3 months after the shooting. And before we saw this, it was being held in her, as evidence, because it was in her backpack, and her backpack had bullets that went through it. So before my family saw this drawing, my dad got a phone call from a man named Frank Amedia. He's a pastor in Illinois. He's a great person, but he called and he said, Mr. Scott, I've seen your daughter's funeral on CNN. They broadcasted the whole thing on CNN and actually uninterrupted, and CNN told our family more people watched my sister's funeral on CNN than Princess Diana's funeral. And during it, people talked about the life and joy and faith that she had. And he said, Mr. Scott, I keep having this dream every night, and I just had to find out if it meant anything to your family. He said, every night for a couple of weeks, I keep having the same dream, and I see your daughter's eyes crying, and a river of tears is coming from her eyes, and it's watering something in the ground, and life is beginning to grow from the ground, but I can't see what it is. And at the time, it didn't mean anything to us because we hadn't seen the journal. And then a week later, we got a phone call from the sheriff's department. My dad went to go pick up the bag. He got out the journal, flipped open to the last page, wanted to see what Rachel put in the very last page. And there he's staring at this picture of her eyes crying, 13 tears watering this rose with drops of blood. And he's thinking of the phone call he just got a week earlier. And so, I mean, you know, the Spirit consists of our communion with God, our intuition, and our conscious. And our intuitive nature, I don't know about you, but in my walk in faith, there's these little whispers that I get almost of things to come, or preparing for something, or to not do something or do something. And then later I find out that voice was so right if I had listened. And it's almost like it could predict the future. It's an intuitive part of us. And so Rachel really, she had a very strong intuition about her life being short, but God using her to impact millions. And as my dad is looking at this rose and this tears in Rachel's eyes, he felt like God spoke to him and said, the rose represents the youth of this nation. And it is growing spiritually from what happened at Columbine. But it's Rachel's tears. It's her sacrifices that she made for others, as she stepped out of her way in compassion to show kindness. And it was ultimately her death that allowed this to happen. And then after that, he saw that drawing, my dad got a call from the House Judiciary of Congress, and they asked him to come speak. And he gave this incredible speech and this incredible poem that in the year 99 or 2000 was one of the most forwarded emails on Internet Explorer. But he addressed Congress, and he said this poem. He said, your laws ignore our deepest needs. Your words are empty air. You've stripped away our heritage, outlawed simple prayer. Gunshots fill our classrooms, precious children die. You seek for answers everywhere and ask the question why. You regulate restrictive law through legislative creed, yet you fail to understand that God is what we need. And then he went into this whole speech about how, as a country, we used to acknowledge that we are a three-part being. We are a body, a soul, our mind, our will, intellect, and emotions, and then a spirit. And for a long time, we always acknowledged that. And so he went into what happens when you stop acknowledging that spiritual part of our makeup. And it was a really powerful speech, and it opened up a lot of doors for speaking. And now that's what I do, is travel around with my program and share her story and share challenges and lessons learned, and try to teach some emotional resiliency and things I've learned about the shooters, about my sister, and my own healing process.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today. You know, we talked about Rachel's Tears is a great book, and that's the book where you get a chance to kind of dive into some of these. Your mom and your dad wrote that book. And obviously, I'm Not Ashamed is a film that people can watch that really shows, I think, how Rachel lived her life. And it's amazing to get a lens into who your sister was. You guys have all impacted so many lives. I appreciate what you do. Where can people go? Let's say there's somebody watching or they're listening and they want to bring you to their school, or they're interested in finding out more about you. Where can they go to do that?
Yeah, my heart's desire is really to speak to as many groups as I can. Obviously, this last year things were really shut down, and so I know that the program that I have, it's called Value Up, and they can go to valueup.org. But I've heard principals and superintendents say it's the most powerful program that they've experienced for their students. And my goal is not just to tell an emotional story and have just an emotional effect. it's really long-term impact on the culture of a place, long-term impact on the culture of a school. So I do a lot more than just do a keynote assembly. I do trainings. I start a club. I have curriculum. I do teacher trainings. I have follow-up media. I have follow-up Zoom sessions with students. So there's a lot that I do because I really want to have a long-term impact. I speak in schools and churches and conferences, even to businesses, and I do all the way from elementary to college. I have an elementary program that has nothing to do with the school shooting. So yes, please, if you think that this is something that would be good for your students' school or your kids' school or your church, please, you can contact. Actually, you can contact me directly. My email is craig@value-up.org. And you can find out a lot on the website, valueup.org.
Thanks so much for coming on today, Craig. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Billy. Good to see you, bro.